Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Huge thanks to you for being with us, and a apology for a little bit of technical stuff. You know, sometimes gremlins get in the machine, things like that. We got to clean those out and get up and running here, but this is too important of a show not to do it the way you've come to expect, so we're all locked and loaded and ready to go. We've got big events to tell you about, including our road to Atlanta all week long. We got Chip Towers coming up, the sights and sounds from Athens, Georgia, where he is today, and a lot from you as well, including questions and comments. Georgia versus Alabama for the SEC Championship. It's Saturday. We'll spend all week getting ready for it. We're glad you're here as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Folks, the media has weighed in. The folks in Las Vegas have weighed in. Opposing fans have weighed in. Certainly the Alabama folks have weighed in. And there seems to be unanimous opinion right now. Georgia's got no chance against Alabama. Might as well not even show up on Saturday in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's going to be an embarrassment. Alabama, which has won all of its games by more than 20 points all season long, is destined for another blowout win against UGA on Saturday. If you're a Dog fan, if you're part of Dog Nation, you might as well cower and hide under your desk, under your bed, under something, because you got no shot against Alabama. Georgia fans better be ready to hear a lot of that this week. And you'll come in here to a DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza, and you'll understand why maybe the conventional wisdom, maybe the predominant narrative all week long, maybe that might not be taking the full picture into account. Because first of all, no matter how many people try to act like that the result of Saturday is a foregone conclusion and Georgia's definitely going to lose and Alabama's definitely going to win, it has been so much fun to be in Athens on Saturday night after the win against Georgia Tech on Saturday, to be around the world of Dog Nation over the last 24 hours, to listen to the fever pitch and the excitement that Georgia fans have about this game, this rematch, this chance to go back and get a measure of retribution against Alabama after what happened in last year's national championship game. There is excitement in the air that will not be in any way muted by the fact that Vegas and the folks from the online sports books seem to think Alabama's a big favorite right now. I thought that excitement was put into good words yesterday by Kirby Smart, who had a chance to speak on the upcoming matchup with Alabama. And you know what he said? And I think all of Georgia fans would agree with this, that this is a game that Georgia fans are very much looking forward to. Here is Kirby.
I know our guys are excited about getting back to Atlanta because that's always a goal for the program here at the University of Georgia, to have an opportunity to go play for a championship, what's one of the best conferences in the country. We know what's at stake. Our kids are excited, and we're looking forward to starting our prep on Alabama.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that as well here on DawgNation Daily, doing our own version of prep for Alabama. And I guess to the extent that I have any influence whatsoever as the host of DawgNation Daily, to the extent that this microphone is going to travel around the world of Georgia fans over the course of the next few days, my simple advice to a fan in terms of your own preparation right now is to embrace the role of being an underdog. Absolutely embrace that. Make that a part of the way that you view this thing, because it's a pretty nice luxury to have a team as talented as Georgia, a team that's enjoyed as much success as Georgia has enjoyed over the last month, showcasing the level of improvement Georgia has showcased since it lost to LSU a few weeks ago, and to also have that team now be told, possibly given the extra motivation of, oh, you got no chance against Alabama. This is a good team that's counted out. This is a good team right now that nobody seems to believe in. And I got to tell you, that's a pretty fun place to be for Georgia on Saturday. You won't hear Kirby Smart address that publicly. You won't hear Georgia players address that publicly. But by now, we know how this kind of stuff works. Privately, this bunch, prideful players, they are seething. But the fact that somebody thinks they are, before the game's even kicked off, going to lose this game by more than 2 touchdowns. So here on DawgNation Daily this week, we're going to kind of do our part with that. I know our producer staffs, our team of producers, they always hate when I move around too much here because that kind of throws off the video. But we're actually going to change the name of our program this week. Normally, every single day, we're called DawgNation Daily, which is the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. This week, though, we're going to be something different. This week, instead of being DawgNation Daily, we're actually going to be, let me get this up here on our screen for those of you watching on video. We're actually going to be Underdog Nation Daily. We're going to embrace the fact that nobody thinks Georgia's got a chance in this game. We're going to embrace the fact that Georgia's going to take that mission and that challenge head on. So this week, when you hear me refer to our show, for this week only, instead of calling it DawgNation Daily, which I always do, this week, we're going to be Underdog Nation Daily, still presented by Marco's Pizza, but Underdog Nation Daily this week, embracing the fact that Georgia's going to take this on head on against Alabama on Saturday. Because after all, as Kirby Smart said when he spoke to reporters last night, that, Alabama's undefeated, ranked number 1 in the country. Georgia's, lowly number 5, only won its games lately by an average of however many points. There's actually maybe more similarities between these two teams than you might realize. The same way that Tua Tagovailoa and the Alabama offense has been a runaway train as of late. You know what? The Georgia offense has been pretty good too, and Kirby Smart spoke about that yesterday. Here's more from Kirby.
Common thing would be quarterback play with third down conversions, protecting the ball, not turning the ball over a lot. Those are similarities. Both got good set of backs, good set of receivers. Both teams are scoring points. Biggest difference is they play better defense, obviously, than we have, and we've got to improve upon that. But I think both teams are good football teams. That's why they represent their divisions in the conference championship, and both teams continue to get better.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to discount what Kirby says at the end. The one thing you do have to give Alabama a good bit of credit for, Crimson Tide has been, over the totality of the season, a better defensive team than Georgia has. Recently, Alabama shut out Mississippi State. Recently, Alabama shut out LSU on the road. You got to give them credit for that. This Georgia defense this season, for the most part, has been a work in progress. But the progress has been ongoing. And defensively, as of late, Georgia's been playing a whole lot better. And offensively, statistically speaking, if you look at these two offenses, the gap between the two is not as great as you might think. Yes, Alabama has been essentially the number 1 offense in every one of these, advanced metrics all season long. But Georgia's been in the top 3 or 4 themselves. If you look at, total QBR rating, which ESPN puts out over the last month or so, Fromm's actually performed better at that metric than Tua Tagovailoa has. The only quarterback in the country to be better at Fromm in recent weeks has probably been Kyler Murray from Oklahoma. So offensively speaking, this is a Georgia bunch that's pretty good right now. This is a Georgia bunch that's in pretty good shape, and even Nick Saban himself was forced to acknowledge that yesterday. Here's Saban.
I can speak to Georgia, just kind of watching them through the year. They have a lot of really good players. They've got great balance on offense. They can run the ball. They can make explosive plays. Quarterback's very efficient in the passing game. They have been a pretty dominant team all season long.
Yeah, Saban's right. The dominance of Georgia has come from its balance. Not only is Jake Fromm, doing what he's doing, he threw a career-high 4 touchdown passes against Georgia Tech on Saturday, but it's really been the emergence of Elijah Holyfield and certainly DeAndre Swift that have made the Georgia offense what it is right now, almost a replica of where this team was last December when Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel were leading the way in concert with Jake Fromm. However, what you don't hear from Saban there, though, is maybe one of the most interesting facets of this offense so far for 2018. And an example of how, even though the name brand superstar talent may seem less than the 2017 version, there are a couple of examples of how Georgia's actually better this season than it was last year. Maybe more equipped to beat Alabama in 2018 than it was in 2017 when it came oh so close. It's the development and growth of the wide receivers. Last year, Georgia had an excellent one in Javon Wims. He's now in the NFL. This year, it's more of a wide receiver by committee, but the overall depth is higher and better. So when you think about the Georgia offense as of late, which has looked a lot like Alabama's, you got to give some credit to the wide receivers for why that has happened, and Kirby Smart also talked about that yesterday.
They've improved with each week. I think, every game's kind of had a different layout with different wideouts kind of being able to showcase their abilities. It doesn't happen by planning by us. It happens by what defenses do and kind of what we get dictated to us by the coverages and how they play us. But I think they played really hard. They've been a huge asset on special teams. I think 6 of those guys start on special teams and do all kinds of things to make our team better, and they've really bought into being a physical core unit, and that's what makes them different.
So let me be very clear about all of this and kind of put a bottom line on this entire discussion. I honestly don't know if Georgia's going to beat Alabama on Saturday. I know it's going to be a football game, and I know the people who act like it's over before it starts are just flat out wrong. But ultimately, the actual end result is still yet to be determined, and it's going to take something close to a perfect game from Georgia to get this done. Unfortunately, Alabama is probably just that good. But in terms of that chase towards perfection, the offensive side of the ball for Georgia is a lot closer to being there than some people realize. This is a group that's moved the ball and scored a lot of points as of late. And I expect both those things to happen. Churning out yards and putting up points, I expect those things to happen against Alabama on Saturday. It's one of the reasons why I'm going to give Georgia a chance to win this game. My name is Brandon Adams, and you are listening to DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for the fans of the 13.5-point underdog, Georgia Bulldogs. And here on this program, we are embracing that wholeheartedly. We think that's a storyline that matters, and we think it's one that Georgia's going to use to its advantage on Saturday, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m. Or thereabouts. DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are glad you're with us here on the program today. Also, huge thanks to Marco's Pizza for making all of this possible every day, just like always, because Marco's is the MVP of Primo Pizza. It's dough-made fresh daily. It's an original sauce recipe, just like the Gianmarco family's been using for centuries. And there are 3 signature cheeses that make every bite magnifico. You can order yours today from Marcos.com. We will get Chip Towers coming up in just a moment. I'm going to ask Chip directly if he thinks that the storyline of being an underdog, the idea that this Georgia team might behind the scenes privately embrace that, does that matter in Saturday's game? We'll give Chip a chance to speak to that coming up in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, let's go around the doghouse here on this Monday, brought to you by Pella Window and Door. And I want to look a little bit more at both what Kirby Smart and Nick Saban had to say yesterday, previewing the SEC championship game. And I think there's kind of an interesting similarity between these two. And I know by now there is, kind of ad nauseum reporting on, Saban and Smart similarities, and Smart's maybe attempt to replicate a lot of what Saban has done in Alabama here at Georgia. But here's one, avenue in which I think they are pretty similar. Neither guy wants to talk very much about the other team, although maybe for slightly different reasons. For instance, Kirby Smart was asked, given the dominance that Georgia has shown in the SEC East and given what Alabama's done in the SEC West, looking back on the fact that these two teams played each other in the national championship game, was circling back and meeting back up again the rematch, was that inevitable? Was this always just guaranteed to happen? Well, as you might imagine, Kirby Smart thinks in college football, especially in the SEC, things aren't quite as simple as that. Here's Kirby.
I don't know that it was inevitable. I mean, certainly both of us had to win some football games to get to it. I think last year's game is last year's game, and our kids are really focused on playing good football. That's really all we've worried about for the last 5 to 6 weeks since the LSU loss, is moving forward and trying to grow as a team and get better. That's been our focal point. It really hasn't been much about last year.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad that Kirby Smart answered that question the way that he did, because I think it speaks to a pretty important point. It may seem, based on the way the preseason magazines were printed, that Georgia was always a shoo-in to win the SEC East. But Georgia had to play some real football to get that done. Georgia had to go on the road and dominate South Carolina. We saw South Carolina partially give Clemson a game for a while on Saturday. Georgia had to, beat Florida. Florida's going to be ranked in the top 10 again this week. They were ranked in the top 10 when Georgia played them. That was a real win. Even if I don't think Florida's very good, it was still a real win based on almost every, metric that we use for college football. They had to earn that right. Had to go on the road to Kentucky. Kentucky faltered a little bit, but that's still a pretty good team. Missouri has turned out to be a pretty good team. Georgia won that game by 2 touchdowns on the road. The inevitability here, I think, that some people view this as, discounts just how much Georgia had to work to actually get to where it is back in the SEC championship game once again. So I think to a certain extent, Kirby Smart was right for saying what he said. How about the other side of this here for a moment? A lot of people now view the rise of Georgia as the only thing standing in Alabama's way, the only potentially stumbling block for the Crimson Tide, not just this year, but every year going forward. Nick Saban doesn't give that thought a whole lot of credence. Here's a little bit more from Saban.
Well, I think every team that we play is standing in our way. I mean, in our league, I think that you have to play well every week. There's a lot of teams that are capable of beating you if you don't bring your A game, and this team obviously has accomplished more than anybody we've played all year in terms of their record, the success that they've had all season long in all phases of the game. So this is obviously even a bigger challenge, but I'm not sure that you approach the game a whole lot different in terms of the kind of mindset you need, kind of preparation you need to have, kind of execution you need to have. When you play against the best players, I think you should assume that we're going to play against some of the best players we played against all year, and I think every day when you prepare, that's how you need to try to prepare.
I think it's really interesting, and I'll admit to a certain extent I'm a little on edge about Alabama and Nick Saban this week, but I think it's really interesting the degree to which Saban seemed to go out of his way to keep from saying anything too specific about Georgia. I think if I'm reading between the lines here, I don't think he likes giving Georgia credit for the way the program has risen up as quickly as it has to be a potential thorn in his side. Now, Georgia's got to actually win the game to finish that off, and as Jeff Sentell and I spoke about last week, to actually become a true rivalry for Alabama, Georgia's got to win one of these games. But pretty clearly, Saban doesn't like talking about Georgia at all, which was kind of funny to hear him yesterday kind of forced in the position of actually having to discuss the matchup coming up with the Dogs on Saturday. It's Around the Doghouse here on this Monday, presented by Pella Window and Door. And, of course, by now you know the Pella Window and Door of Georgia can help you equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. They're family-owned and operated, but they've also got a branch right here in Georgia, which means it's local service backed by a national company. You can't beat that 2-for-1 deal. Currently, you can get 50% off qualifying installations also with 0% APR on 48 months. It's valid through the end of the year. Pella offers the best lifetime warranty with top-of-the-line equipment and unparalleled expertise. So schedule your free in-home consultation today, and Pella's winning team is going to take care of everything, including the measurements. Now, there are a couple of ways to get in touch. You can find them online at pellasoutheast.us. The website, once again, pellasoutheast.us, or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom, 404-445-2979, 404-445-2979. So contact them right now for the 1-2 punch of the local service backed by the power of a national company. It's why Pella Window and Door is viewed to be the best. All right, good to have you with us here on Underdog Nation Daily here today. We got more from both Kirby Smart and Nick Saban coming up today and throughout the week. Also tell you about all the big events coming up here around Dog Nation this week as well. But for now, though, let's check in more on what's going to happen with UGA on Saturday and what's happening right now in Athens. Let's talk to Chip Towers.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always a real treat to have Chip Towers here on Mondays on DawgNation Daily, especially this week. It's such a big game, and Chip's knowledge of the Georgia program goes back so far. He's seen obviously every one of these. I guess now this will be the 7th trip for Georgia to the SEC championship game, and Chip, we've seen Georgia face long odds before in SEC championships. It happened in 2003, happened in 2011. Neither of those games worked out particularly well for Georgia. But when you look at the way that this team's going to approach Alabama on Saturday, Georgia's been humming along pretty good as of late, but it seems like the betting public doesn't give them much of a chance to win on Saturday. How much do you think behind the scenes Georgia may choose to use that and be motivated by number 5 team in the country, yet almost an afterthought in this coronation for Alabama in the SEC championship? Is that something you think that Georgia can use as some fuel behind the scenes?
Oh, absolutely. Scott Sinclair in particular and Georgia's strength and conditioning staff, they're really the motivational, coaches when it comes to the Bulldogs, and they'll use, everything possibly at their disposal. Kirby's going to keep it more, Kirby and his staff more to what's going on the field, the matchups and that kind of thing. And I've got a Tower Steak up on Dog Nation right now, Brandon. When you get a microscope out and you really look at this thing really, really close, I mean, there's a lot of things for Georgia to feel pretty good about coming into this game. Certainly, I have all the respect in the world for those guys in Vegas, those professionals who handicap these things. It's amazing how good they are, and maybe Alabama is going to beat Georgia by 2 touchdowns. I don't think anybody would be surprised if they did, but there's also a lot to like about Georgia in this matchup, and I think Georgia's definitely going to play that card as the underdog and use it to the best of their ability, because they bring a little, they have some stuff to fear on their sideline as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And you know that I'm probably the least objective person that will talk about this game all week long. The one thing I've been saying all year, though, is that I did truly believe that Georgia would improve over the course of the season. If Georgia played Alabama in September or early October, the game would not have gone well. I'm pretty confident in that. It may still not go well on Saturday. Georgia may not win it, but playing the game in December, I think, suits Georgia the best because of the way that guys like Jordan Davis have improved, the way that this offensive line hopefully is getting healthier in time for this after missing a couple key pieces over the last few weeks. Playing the game in December is certainly a better deal for Georgia than it would have been earlier in the year. It may not be enough, but that's a factor that matters, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think playing them, in December rather than October is could probably be substantiated. I mean, obviously Georgia didn't play well at all October 13th against LSU, and that's what really, quite frankly, a lot of people are focusing on is just looking at the, whatever it is, the 42-point differential or something. When you have, Alabama winning by 29 at LSU and Georgia losing by 20 or 19 there, whatever it was. A lot of people are looking at that game. That's actually something else I'm examining this week. It's really amazing the transformation of Georgia from that game in Baton Rouge to now. Georgia learned a lot about itself and learned about, what it should and shouldn't do in that game at LSU. And it's shown, if you look at it, just, steady improvement, in incremental improvement almost every week since then. Now, certainly the competition has a lot to do with it, but, there's an argument to be made on that too. I mean, actually, Alabama kind of fattened up on a weakened West this year. The East was 9-5 against the West in the SEC play this season, and that hasn't gone that way for a decade. So there's definitely some improvement been made by Georgia, and Alabama's confident for a lot of reasons too. So we'll see.
I think it's really interesting to hear both these coaches talk on the teleconference last night, because they're forced to address the other side. For Saban, it means talking about Georgia. For Kirby, it means talking about Alabama. That's not something that either of these two coaches, I think, enjoys doing very much. But, Chip, I do DawgNation Daily every single day, and we've probably talked about the idea of rematching with Alabama in some form or fashion almost every day for virtually an entire calendar year. There is a sense in which this just sort of seemed ordained or, written in stone a year ago that we'd be back in this spot, about 11 months later. But for both these coaches, that's not something they want to put a lot of lip service to, even though I think for, media members, the average fans, we, for the most part, always knew this was the way it was going to happen, and I think most of us would assume it's going to happen this way again next year too. But these guys don't want to talk about it that way, do they?
No, they don't. But Saban pretty much acknowledged a little bit, to the extent that Nick Saban will acknowledge anything. On the teleconference last night about when when he first came back into the league with Alabama in 2007. Florida was the dragon that had to be slayed at the time, and he admitted to being focused on that objective, and Kirby won't admit it as much. He's always going to stick with, we're focused on the next opponent and whoever's up next. But whether it's on the recruiting trail or it's a week to week installation of your offense and your defense and what it is you're trying to achieve. You always got to think about being the best, and to be the best in this conference, you got to beat Alabama. That's who it is right now. Alabama, deservedly so, has carried that torch for quite a while now. So, that's why Georgia, Kirby's gone out and recruited classes that were 6-3-1 respectively. There's every reason to believe that the talent that's gathered on Georgia's sideline is equal to the talent of that on the Alabama sideline right now. Now, the difference is maturation. Georgia's a little bit ahead of the game. We've cited many times that they're 2/3 freshman and sophomore. But the reality is from a pedigree standpoint, you've got the same level of athletes. And as you alluded to, when you're meeting in December, those guys have had a chance to grow up, to figure out what it's all about, and that's what we're seeing right now. Now, there's still some bad matchups for Georgia in this game. The front sevens are, is markedly in Alabama's favor. But I think everywhere else across the board, Georgia can hang. And, with a couple of good bounces and a good call or two, they might be able to pull this thing off.
I think the comparison between Georgia and some of these other programs that Saban's had to deal with at Alabama is pretty interesting. And I do think it's a little bit more accurate to compare Georgia to Florida from 2008, 2009 than, say, the Auburn team when it won the national championship in 2010. That was a team that, for the most part, was led by two very good players. Obviously, Cam Newton on offense, Nick Fairley on defense. That wasn't that deep of a team otherwise. LSU, that would kind of emerge later, that was a much more one-dimensional team, more focused on defense. They were never great offensively. In terms of the overall balance and depth on both sides of the ball, I do think Georgia's a more accurate comparison to those Florida teams. The only difference is that was Urban Meyer at the end of his Florida run. Maybe he was a little bit out of gas. This is Kirby Smart at the beginning of his run. And, Chip, whether Saban wants to acknowledge it, it's that youthful energy that Smart has, which I think is probably the thing that's the biggest threat of all to Alabama.
Yeah, that's what Georgia's the young kid on the block here. Georgia up and comer, and I think there's no question that they're going to eventually grow up, right? I mean, it's just a matter of time. These guys are going to grow, and everything's a little bit skewed this year. I think this is the reason that there's kind of the national narrative that you have on Alabama coming in this game, and certainly a 13.5 point favorite. Is the margin of victory. I mean, Alabama's just annihilated everybody, but a lot of that has had to do with, I think, that Alabama has been better than everybody that they've played. They've substituted like Georgia has in the second half. The main difference with them is they have more depth overall, and they have Jalen Hurts as their backup quarterback. So they bring their backup quarterback in the second half, and they're still throwing the football around. Now, I'm not saying they're trying to run the ball, run the score up, but I mean they're still throwing the ball around a good bit, and that's inflated the margins of victories. But here's the thing about a game like this, changes again. It doesn't matter how deep you are from a 66 to 85 player. This is about the top 44 players, and I think Georgia's top 44, is very comparable to Alabama's top 44. Maybe not a season, but certainly comparable, and that's where this game is going to be decided. Not about what happens in the fourth quarter when you're, averaging whatever they did, 20-plus points in the final stanza.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. Let me ask you a question that if you were to ask this question to Kirby Smart, there's no way he'd answer it, but this is something that fans are talking about this week. Chip, everywhere I go, there's some version of this question of, is Georgia saving something for Alabama, whether it be a special package for Justin Fields or some sort of creative use of the offense we haven't seen already this year. The defensive version of that may be blitzing Brenton Cox more or getting Adam Anderson as a pass rusher involved more than now that he's ready and looks like a pretty capable player. This notion that maybe Georgia got some sort of surprise element to its playbook, offensively or defensively. Fans are going to talk about that a lot. Kirby Smart would completely disregard the question, but what's your thought on the idea that maybe Georgia's got a little something hidden and ready to a spring on Alabama come Saturday?
Well, that's always the case. Teams always have a briefcase, okay, that they kind of carry with them all year long of some special weapons that they're going to break out at a special time. It happens everywhere all the time, and Alabama has that as well. So be aware of that. But what the situation is here is that I think first off, I don't think it's true. I don't think Georgia's been holding anything back. But I think Georgia's going to have to do some things in this game that they're probably not as comfortable with. One of the things Georgia's been absolutely fantastic about, and I think it's a great matchup in this game, is giving up an explosive play. They lead the nation, Brandon. They lead the nation in fewest number of 20-yard plays of 20 yards or more. This is what Alabama lives on. They live on the explosive plays. So I think, on some accounts, they're going to force Alabama to do some things differently because Georgia's just not easy about letting I don't care how good your wide receiver core is, about letting folks behind them. Now, the flip side of that is the book on Tua is you've got to get to it. I mean, you can't just let him sit back there, and you got to be very careful about getting after him. But I think, Georgia is going to have to take a few more risks than they have all season. Now, we've seen this in little glimpses in the last third of the season. We've seen Georgia get after the quarterback a little bit when they've had to. This is not exclusive to anybody. Todd Grantham is not the only defensive coordinator in the country that has 57 blitz packages. Kirby Smart and Mel Tucker have those as well. They just have chosen not to deploy them for many, many reasons, But you're going to have to do that some of this game. You're going to have to take some chances that you wouldn't normally take because, again, if you just stick with the status quo against Alabama, I don't think it's going to work. So I don't think they're necessarily saving things, but I think you might see some things that you haven't seen all year.
All right, we're getting close to the Kirby Smart press conference for the audience that's watching live, so let me do two quick things with you, and then we'll let you go after that. You mentioned Alabama's dominance this season, although it's worth pointing out that as of late, maybe not quite as dominant as it was earlier in the year. For instance, two good defenses, LSU and Mississippi State, both held Alabama below 30 points. I thought the Alabama defense actually got exposed a little bit to Auburn on Saturday. Now, that's really looking deep to find something because these have all still been, by the final score margin, very easy Alabama wins. But if you're a Georgia fan this week, Chip, do you take any hope in the fact that the last few weeks haven't been at least 50-0 the way we saw some of this stuff in the beginning of the year? What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, Coach Saban talked about that himself. He said really he hadn't been happy with the way they've operated in the first half the last 3 games. You can see they've kept the scores, opponents have kept the scores somewhat respectable in the first half of the last couple of games at least. Even the Citadel was able to play to a 10-10 tie. And, who knows if some of that might be Alabama just being a little disinterested and unmotivated. And certainly they're an explosive team that has made it clear that they can turn it on at any time. And that's been the third quarter in particular all year long. But that's kind of the status quo for any powerful team. They can usually get it done in the middle quarters and take care of what they need to do against the opponent. So, I mean, I think, Alabama has flaws. They're not perfect. This is not the greatest secondary that Alabama has put together. Georgia has a decided advantage in special teams. It always comes down to the same things. It comes down to penalties. It comes down to turnovers, taking care of the football, field position, funny bounces, all those kind of things. But, if Georgia is able to kind of take care of the football and play like they have in the last few weeks, which is extremely efficient. It doesn't mean scoring every time like you had against Georgia Tech in the first half, but just being efficient with the football and not doing anything, disastrous. They'll be able to stay in this game to the end.
All right, quick final point for you, or a quick final question I want to get to you. There's also some talk nationally that for Alabama, they don't even have to win this game. They've already earned their way in the college football playoff by the virtue of being 12-0. I find that distasteful because I think it cheapens an event that I love. My favorite sporting event of all is the SEC championship game. I don't want to see it cheapened by it becoming a de facto exhibition prior to the playoff. Do you think that Alabama truly is one of the 4 best teams in the country, even if it loses on Saturday?
I do. I kind of share that, and I'm just going kind of by the eye test and everything else. And then there's some pretty cool, statistical data out there, things like the Massey ratings, which take into account strength of schedule and margin of victory and all that kind of stuff. And if you look at quantifications like that, Alabama's head and shoulders above the other teams. So I kind of feel like that's the case. But I really think that's a fundamental problem with the college football playoff. And look, it's not going to change for a while, and it's not even really worth bringing it up in the debate right now. But I fall in the camp that believes that conference champions only should advance. I think that's what conference championships are for, and I think when you go to a playoff system, that's what the playoffs are. You take the playoffs don't start when those 4 teams are designated. The second week of December, they actually are designated in the subdivision, the divisional races, and then in the championship. So, but I do believe that Alabama. It depends on how the game goes. I guess Georgia could blow the roof off of Mercedes-Benz and blow them out of there and have everybody question it. But just based on the numbers, and this is very much a numbers game, I think Alabama still gets in, even if they lose, especially if it's a close football game.
Chip, great stuff. Thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily, and we'll look forward to reading a lot from you at DawgNation.com this week.
A lot to read this week. We'll see.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I thanked Chip for being on the show, but I said it incorrectly. This week it's not DawgNation Daily, as I said before. It's Underdog Nation Daily, and we are really excited about embracing the underdog status for UGA on Saturday, and really thrilled about our road to Atlanta all week long, driven by Cadillac. Let me give you an idea of some of the stuff that's coming up this week, and I want to try to throw all of this at you, and I really hope you'll make plans to be a part of this, because I just think this is going to be an incredible week around Dog Nation. Let me first of all mention to you on Thursday, Road to Atlanta live at the Marlowe's Tavern in Brookhaven. This is going to be an awesome event. It's our biggest Marlowe's event of the year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Jeff Sintel's going to be there. I'm going to be there. Also, special guest, the former Georgia great John Stinchcomb. Remember, Stinch was on the first Georgia team to win the SEC championship. So he's got great memories of that, and he'll tell those stories and be a part of all of that. Starting at 6 p.m. on Thursday. Let me give you the address here for the Marlowe's in Brookhaven for those of you who are listening. It's a 3575 Durden Drive. That's the Marlowe's Brookhaven. 3575 Durden Drive in Atlanta. Marlowe's Brookhaven. 6 p.m. Road to Atlanta live on Thursday. Now, speaking of the Road to Atlanta also culminates actually in Atlanta on Saturday with our Road to Atlanta tailgate. Now, many of you did this with us last year. This is going to be so much fun. And by the way, it's free of charge. You can just show up and be a part of it. It's going to be in the Blue Lot starting 11 a.m. on Saturday. A lot of you asked, hey, is Dixie Vodka coming back? Are they going to be giving out the complimentary samples once again? Dixie Vodka is indeed going to be there doing that. They're going to be giving away those samples, so they're going to be a part of the tailgate, as well as Kroger, our friends from Cadillac, Pella Window and Door, and Marlowe's Tavern, starting 11 a.m. at the Blue Lot on Saturday, which is just right across from the stadium. We'll have Dixie Vodka samples. We'll have DawgNation gear to give away. We'll have big TV set up. I'm going to be there. Jeff Sintel's going to be there. A whole host of your favorites from my DawgNation going to be on hand. So please come by and see us for our Road to Atlanta tailgate on Saturday. And huge thanks to Cadillac, Dixie Vodka, Pella Window and Door, Marlowe's Tavern, and Kroger for making that all possible. Now, speaking of Road to Atlanta, one more thing to tell you about, because we want to make sure you are fully prepared for the game on Saturday. We're actually doing an extra broadcast this week in addition to the stuff that we normally do. We're also going to be doing Road to Atlanta, a special preview starting today at 5 p.m., driven by Cadillac. I'll be there. Mike Johnson's going to be a part of the show, too. For those of you that like Mike, you'll love that. Mike's going to give us some enemy intel on the Alabama side of things as we get ready for the Road to Atlanta on Saturday. This comes at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the DawgNation video channels. We'll hear from Kirby Smart, Georgia players, the Alabama side of things. We'll do a lot every single day at 5 p.m. this week on our Road to Atlanta. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's driven by Cadillac. Please make sure you are a part of that. Now, as our SEC through rolls on, I also want to talk about something we were talking about with Chip a moment ago. For some reason, I am all bent out of shape about this notion that Alabama has already qualified for the playoff. I just find that really distasteful. And Chip said, hey, well, if you look at the Massey ratings, Alabama's number one. They are. They're also number one in the ESPN Football Power Index, Bill Conley's S&P ratings at footballstudyhall.com, Brian Fremo's FEI ratings at Football Outsiders. Alabama essentially sweeps the country number one in all the advanced metrics. But here's the thing you need to understand about those advanced metrics, and I try to read those closely and follow them and pay very close attention to them. Those rating services, those numbers don't really change with head-to-head results. They're really about per-play data. So you can be number one statistically and not be undefeated anymore. That, you know, what college football has to decide, what's going to really matter. Is it just stats that are going to matter? Well, if it's just stats, then we shouldn't even have a playoff. Not only is Alabama already among the top four, there's really no team in the country that even comes close to matching what Alabama's done this season. So if stats are going to determine that, then stats ought to negate the entire idea of having a playoff. But if you're going to have a playoff where head-to-head results advance, then head-to-head results ought to matter in the conference championship game too. Georgia, if it beats Alabama as one of the five best teams in the country playing another top five team in Alabama, that ought to serve as a de facto quarterfinal game. That doesn't exist for the Big Ten or the Big 12 or the other leagues because they don't have the same caliber of teams playing. But in the SEC, it does. And if Georgia wins, its head-to-head matchup ought to be honored. It shouldn't be devalued just because Alabama's been undefeated upcoming in the season. Frankly, it's another opportunity for Alabama to take advantage of the system the way that it did a year ago, weaseling its way into the playoffs a year ago as a non-conference champion. It almost has the stench of crony capitalism, the kind of thing that no matter what political stripe you're on, you kind of don't like. This is what that kind of feels like. It's almost like a corporate welfare to benefit Alabama if they were to make the playoff again, even if they don't win the SEC. So I'm kind of bent out of shape about that, but we'll see what happens after Georgia wins this game on Saturday as a 13.5-point underdog. By the way, real quick, another SEC item to get to on Saturday. From Saturday, did you see the deep into the night, late 7 overtime game won by Texas A&M over LSU? Was it 74-72? Was that the final score of that game? Highest scoring game in college football history. You know, I don't know if this is good for the SEC or not. I almost wonder, is there a way, kind of like you do in international soccer, I guess all versions of soccer, where if you go into the penalty kicks, those kicks don't count as a part of the final score, right? I mean, if you're in a draw situation and you go into the penalty kicks, the score of the game doesn't become like 8-7 or something like that. Maybe maybe if you go into college football overtime, maybe you shouldn't count those touchdowns as touchdowns, even though you need them to win. I mean, something about an SEC game finishing 74-72 is not exactly the brand of the conference that I was born watching, but it was certainly an entertaining game, even if it was a little bit strange for SEC standards. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, I want to do, or I should say Underdog Nation Daily. I got to get used to saying the new name. Underdog Nation Daily here. It's time for our R.S. Andrews Cool Under Pressure Performer of the Week, and hopefully our buddy Dari over at R.S. Andrews will be okay with me doing this. Instead of looking back to last Saturday's game against Georgia Tech and the win for the Dogs there and honoring somebody from that game, I want to talk for a moment about who needs to be cool under pressure this week. And I don't know that there's any group that's got more at stake on Saturday than that very good Georgia offensive line. We're led by Lamont Gilliard there in the middle and Andrew Thomas at left tackle, and hopefully some healthy returns for guys like Ben Cleveland and Kay Mays. That's a group that needs to have a good week, a good day in Mercedes-Benz Stadium against this very, very tough Alabama front seven. I told you off the top of the show that I think that Georgia can move the football. Moving the football means putting some hats on some very good Alabama defenders, though, in order to make that happen, and Kirby Smart admitted that himself when he spoke last night.
It's always a challenge. Alabama's always separated themselves in regards to the offensive and defensive lines, and this team is no different. They've got extremely talented offensive line, extremely talented defensive line, so that's who they are. There's no bones about it. There's no way around it. They're good on both lines of scrimmage, and that's where they try to control the game. It'd be a great challenge for offensive line. They get to go against a really talented group.
I think we're to the point now where if Georgia is matching with a team that it's obviously inferior to Georgia on its lines of scrimmage, then Georgia's almost in a point where it's not capable of losing. It's almost guaranteed a victory against inferior offensive and defensive lines. But against LSU this year, against Auburn last year, against Alabama in January, it did lose when it took on really formidable offensive and defensive lines. When it met its match at the line of scrimmage, Georgia lost that game. That's a question for Georgia to answer and deal with this week. In particular, when you think of Alabama, you think about these great superstar defensive linemen. Alabama got a huge performance in the title game a year ago from Raekwon Davis, the new name that everyone seems to be marveling at this year for good reason, putting up big-time stats is Quinnen Williams. Kirby Smart knows him going back from his time as a assistant in Alabama, and he says, you know what, this is another guy we got to block on Saturday.
The last season I was there, Quinn was one of the commits and certainly a very talented player. I think anybody would tell you he's improved immensely over the last couple of years. He's a guy that's developed and gotten better with each year, and he's playing at a really high level.
Yeah, so I think that just ends up being one of the key matchups on Saturday. Lamont Gilliard. Do you get, Ben Cleveland back healthy? I keep mentioning Cade Mays. Even though that's not a group that Georgia has used this year in this way, I think that Georgia's best five actually includes Mays probably playing left guard, with all due respect to Solomon Kinley. I think Mays at left guard, potentially, Ben Cleveland at right guard, Lamont Gilliard in the middle, the two very good tackles with Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson. That's Georgia's best five. But whatever you do in terms of what combination you use, you got to block Quinnen Williams. You got to block this Alabama front seven. You got to keep those linebackers busy. Auburn had some success with that on Saturday. If you do so, maybe this thing has a chance of working out. So for this week, as we look ahead to Saturday's championship game, it's the Georgia offensive line, the group that I'm suggesting needs to be cool under pressure. Of course, that's brought to you by our friends at R.S. Andrews, and frosty mornings can bring a smile to your face when you make the call to get an R.S. Andrews furnace checkup. Our trained techs are clean and on time, and they drive beyond ordinary furnace checkups. R.S. Andrews inspects your heat exchanger for leaks, checks your filters, your flue, your vents, and more, getting your system back to factory fresh specs. And the great news is it's all just $99. So call R.S. Andrews, the heating, cooling, and plumbing and electrical pros that DawgNation's trusts, or log on to rsandrews.com today. Our buddy Dari's a huge football fan, loves the Georgia Bulldogs. No doubt he's going to be loving what he's going to see on Saturday with the Dogs and the Crimson Tide. And we appreciate R.S. Andrews bringing cool under pressure to us each and every week here on DawgNation Daily. All right, let me wrap up here on Underdog Nation Daily this way. That's going to still take me a little while to get used to, but that is our name of the week, Underdog Nation Daily. And I thought Chip Towers said something interesting when we spoke to him a few minutes ago, that if you look at the overall talent for Georgia and Alabama, statistically speaking, Alabama still has a slight edge. I think if you want to do the 4- and 5-star ratio, what Bud Elliott from SB Nation calls the blue chip ratio, I want to say Alabama's right there around, 75, 77%. If memory holds, Georgia's at about 69%. But as Chip said, it's really your top 44. You're too deep on offense and defense that matters the most. From that standpoint, Georgia's in pretty good shape. There are a couple spots where Georgia's still got some 3-star guys who's asking to make some contributions from. We'll see how much that matters on Saturday. Really fun stuff from Chip. By the way, speaking of the Florida Gators, 758 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hitter Updated right here on DawgNation Daily, and we'll see you tomorrow. And on video. Folks, thanks so much for your patience from earlier. We apologize for some technical issues, but really a huge thanks to everybody for getting that all cleaned up and helping us get the show on the air the way we've come to expect. The bad news is, because we are a little bit later, I do not have time for a lot of comments. I've got to get a couple things done. So let me do this. Let me take a couple on both sides, on Facebook and on YouTube. Let me take a couple comments, and then tomorrow we'll try to make time for as many comments as we possibly can. So I appreciate your patience with that. But let me knock out a couple comments, and then we will we'll get out of here for today. But I do hope you'll join us at 5 p.m. today for Road to Atlanta driven by Cadillac. That's going to be a great show. A lot of fun. I can't wait to do that. So let me get the Facebook comments pulled up here. And Zach Smith says if Josh Davis is B, it's going to be Underdog Nation. You have to put the sign on the laptop also. That's right. So this is not my normal show laptop, but if I'm using this tomorrow, he's right. We've got to put the under right here for Underdog Nation too. Now, I wanted to be careful about calling it underdognation.com too much because I didn't want people to think that was our URL because obviously I don't think we own that URL, although I guess maybe we should. But I did want to be careful with that. But you're right. If we're going to do that, we got to slap that the word under on the laptop too. That's a good point. Tiffany Odom says, will Justin Fields be used more against Alabama? I certainly think it's a possibility. Nick Lurch says underdog SEC champs. And, Nick, that's my whole point for this whole week, is that Georgia can ride that underdog momentum, that nobody believes in this train, and get right back to where it was a year ago as the defending SEC champions, which if I had my normal laptop, I'd have my SEC champ sticker on here. I think that's exactly what the conversation here is this week. Miriam Martin Corbin says the team with the biggest motivation will win. That's us. Yeah, Georgia's still got a lot to overcome with Alabama because, statistically speaking, it is a slightly more talented roster. But as Miriam points out, I do think motivation matters. And there is an extent to which Georgia can use the underdog status here as its motivation. I'm just going to do my part to fan the flames of that. Mark Duraney says, can we watch the game at the tailgate? Yes, Mark, you can. We'll have the TVs. My understanding is, anyway, if I'm wrong about this, my boss will come in here and yell at me. But last year the TV stayed up and running the entire time, so I believe that's going to be the case here once again. Drew Miller says instead of Eddie. And by the way, the whole Underdog Nation Daily thing was Eddie's idea this week. Instead of Eddie, maybe I should have an elephant with its trunk wrapped around its neck. That's not a bad idea. Jeremy Cropper says time for those freshmen to show why they chose UGA. Yeah, y'all. I mean, I've been saying this for a while. I'm so all in on these freshmen. I have. You talk about like diversifying your portfolio. My portfolio is not diversified whatsoever. I have got every dollar I have invested in Jordan Davis and Channing Tindall and Adam Anderson and that group. Not that they're the best players in the Georgia defense, but they're the missing piece that Georgia needs. If Georgia wins this game on Saturday, you better believe that next Monday we will probably be talking a lot about some Georgia freshmen there in that regard. All right, over here on YouTube, let me get a couple, and then y'all, I have got to go, and I apologize. Austin Kilby says, what hurts Georgia is the fact that Alabama and UGA are so similar. Our offensive and defensive scheme is similar, so because that is true, maybe it's a little bit of an advantage for Alabama. I think he said the comment scrolled before I could finish it. Yeah, I alluded to this just briefly a moment ago. Who has beaten Georgia in the last 2 years? It's teams that kind of are capable of it matching what Georgia does, or in some cases out-Georgia-ing what Georgia wants to do. I mean, say what you will about Auburn, but they were capable of being very physical in November last year, and it worked out to an Auburn victory. LSU this year was capable of really bringing some physicality on the offensive and defensive line. At the time, Georgia just wasn't able to match that, and Georgia lost the game. The same thing kind of happened to Alabama in the SEC championship. Now, Georgia's also gotten its revenge against Auburn last December and went toe-to-toe with Alabama and could have won that game. So this is not an issue of Georgia not being able to match, physical prowess with a physical team. But it is worth pointing out that if you're not a bruising line of scrimmage team, you got no chance of beating Georgia. Oklahoma almost won the game, but they didn't. I mean, ultimately, those finesse-oriented football teams are not going to beat Georgia. You have to be like what Alabama is or like what LSU was to be capable of beating Georgia. But Georgia's also shown that it can be what it wants to be, even against teams that are trying to match what Georgia's trying to do. So I think Austin's point's a fair one, and it's clearly an issue that Georgia must address, but it's going to be a major storyline going into Saturday. All right, let me get Enrique Murillo, and then I've got to go, y'all. Enrique says if Northwestern keeps it close with Ohio State, and so does Texas, and Georgia loses a close one, Georgia will make it a tough selection. They have a shot for sure. Yeah, Enrique, I think that's kind of a fair point that, if you're going to say, well, Alabama can make the playoff, even if it loses on Saturday, that there ought to be a scenario alive for Georgia to do the same thing. Because if Alabama's number one, Georgia's sidling the top 5. They may be ranked number 4 come Tuesday night. So I think we're in a scenario here where fair is fair. And you're going to say, well, Georgia shouldn't have lost to LSU. That's something that Alabama avoided. They won at LSU. You can't deny that, but you're going to have to find 4 teams to make the college football playoff. And, the Oklahoma resume, given its defensive struggles, may not be so great if it's not, exactly coasting against Texas. The same thing for Ohio State against a Northwestern team that's like, Chip referenced the Massey ratings before. The ones that I pay the most attention to are Football Outsiders and Football Study Hall and the ESPN Power Index. Northwestern's barely in the top 80. I mean, they're like 78th or something like that in FPI, or one of those analytics rating services. So if Ohio State's struggling there, then I would suggest maybe Georgia does look deserve a second look. But you and I both know Georgia's probably not going to get it. C. Hill says nice sweatshirt. Yeah, I thought I'd break out. It's kind of cold in the Atlanta area today. Plus, this is a really cool piece from our friends at Tailgate Apparel. So I thought I'd break a little Tailgate Apparel sweatshirt for today to be excited in honor of the big week to come. We're on the road to Atlanta. It's driven by Cadillac later today at 5 p.m. Getting ready for Marlowe's on Thursday with John Stinchcomb and Jeff Sintel. Road to Atlanta tailgate on Saturday with the Dixie Vodka samples. Our friends from Kroger and Marlowe's and Pella Window and Door, and, of course, Cadillac as well. And we're back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. 13.5-point underdogs. That's what the world will have you believe about the Georgia Bulldogs. And so we're going to embrace that and say Underdog Nation Daily is back tomorrow morning at 10. We'll see you there and hope you have a great day today.